If you are thinking of joining the Canadian Armed Forces, don't. Do not join the military. Don't do it. And I'll tell you why during this podcast. In fact, I've told you why in a lot of prior podcasts. Why not? Because if you do, and if you get injured after being coerced into taking the COVID-19 jibby jab, which is a requirement if you join the forces, still, yes, it is. You need three. You need three to stay current in order to go on deployments, in order to go on career training, in order to not be a second class military member. You will need those three jibby jabs. That's right. And if you were to be injured, and if you were to become unalived from this jibby jab, as they have done in the past, the Canadian Armed Forces will abandon you. They will not give you duty of care. They will not care for your family, and they will not care for you. They will just release you and tell you, oh, sorry, not work related. That's why you don't join the Canadian Armed Forces, because they will not adhere to the social contract. They say they do. More to follow after the intro. Welcome back to Occam's Razor. Please like, share, subscribe. If you have any tips you'd like to leave, there's an email down below. If there's any other kind of tips, there's another link down below. Now, let's get into what we were talking about. Now, there's been some news this week regarding the Canadian Armed Forces, and we're going to build on one of the prior podcasts dealing with the Canadian Armed Forces while we add all this new information that is delight. Army contractor fails audit. Auditors are faulting a $157 million military contract for poor service. I'll tell you what, in the military, when we were in, we had a nickname for Brookfield. When we have to do a move, we just cringe and go, oh my God, we got to deal with Crookfield. That's right. We called them Crookfield because of the poor service that they gave us. People don't realize what military members go through. Because typically, if you get promoted, you're going to get posted. You're going to get posted and you're going to have to move. In fact, movements in the military over the years has swung, depending on your trade and depending on where you are in your career. In the Air Force in the 90s, they decided they were going to keep people on the same fleets for 10 years, acknowledging how much time and effort and money it took to train people to become proficient on one aircraft. And they said, no, maybe we should move them around every 3 to 4 years and then have to train on a new airframe. Back then, they were all smaller, separate trades, so it was a lot quicker to bring people up to speed to do their jobs. But since then, a lot of the trades in the armed forces have turned into joint trades, amalgamation of trades. Uh, a jack of all trades, master of none is what they've done for many of the technical trades in the Canadian Armed Forces in order to save money, in order to reduce the amount of time that it would take to put somebody through a training system. And as it turned out, it didn't do that at all. It took more time to train people, took more time to bring them up to speed. Now we're stuck with this system that basically takes 4 years to get an aircraft technician up to speed and training and certified to actually sign for his work on an airframe. It is what it is. But along those lines, Brookfield having the asset management contract to move people around, the services that they provided, the complaints were usually the same. Slow service, screwed up paperwork. And when you're trying to move and you're trying to sell a house and you're trying to buy another house and you're dealing with legal issues, and then these clowns don't stick to their schedule, I got to tell you, before the military started hiring contractors to assist with doing the paperwork for moves, it used to be done by clerks. We used to have a lot of clerks in the military. And guess what they did to their trade? They amalgamated their trade as well, made them masters of none. We had specialist financial clerks and other clerks and movement clerks. I think they had like 4 or 5 separate clerk trade positions before they amalgamated them all into one to do more with less, as is always. And then, of course, there was a reason for that, so that the system would fail so that the government could hire their friends, bring in these contractors. Oh, and look whose face is on that page. Oh, yes, that's right. Who was the CEO of Crookfield? I mean, Brookfield at the time. Mr. Carney, our current prime minister, who has yet to reveal where all his financial assets are sitting. Hmm. All right, let's move on to the next story. Army drops standard IQ test. Now, this is an older story from February 2025, and there's a reason why I brought this up. Now, recruiting is down in the toilet. They know they're short by 5,000 people. In fact, Western Standard here says they're short by 20,000 because they include the reserve numbers. So we have over 5,000 regular force shortfall, over 15,000 shortfall in the reserves, right? And they think it's simply a recruiting bottleneck. Now, this is true. Canada has always had a recruiting bottleneck. I got to tell you, from when I was in the training system itself, and I mean teaching, not being going through the training system, we always had an issue with recruiting. We're dealing with people who've just come out of basic military training into our technical school, and every instructor becomes a course mother, so to speak. You get a couple of courses you have to babysit, you have to take care of their administrative needs. So it's normal leadership thing. You talk with them, you have interviews with them, right? And you discover, especially during classes, there's a bit of lag time, and you have discussions, and you find out what went through, what happened, how they joined the military, how long it took. And it's always the same thing. Hell, it was the same thing when I joined. When I was a member of the reserve, joining the regular force, it took me like 2.5 years. And I was an active reservist. Now, mind you, there was a bit of a delay because, you know, my first choice um, would have taken even longer. But my second choice at the time, which was airframe, still took me 2.5 years. And there were openings every year. There were openings. But this recruiting system has had issues. I've had friends who, in their promotion, would end up going to a recruiting center, and their eye-opening situation that they dealt with there as well is the same situation that we see everywhere else in the armed forces. Why are there recruiting issues? Why are there issues anywhere where we run stuff in the military and we run into bottlenecks and problems? It's the officers. They're the ones in charge. They're the ones in their own culture, for whatever reason, delay these decisions. And I understand having a desk and having to do decisions on my own in the military as well, how things can really get backed up and you get a backlog and the paperwork just keeps coming in. It's amazing. It's amazing how that can happen. But we're talking about recruitment here. So after like 40 years, we still have a recruitment issue putting people into the military. Oh, you're going to find out it's more than just recruitment, isn't it? Maybe it's culture. Maybe it's equipment. Malfunctioning missiles purchased by Canadian Army for personnel in Latvia now fixed. A lot of civilians don't understand that military equipment is not necessarily the best stuff. When they say MILSPEC, oh, this is MILSPEC stuff. This is military stuff. This is the best stuff. No, no. Unfortunately, most of the time, goes to the lowest bidder. Lowest bidder doesn't necessarily make the best equipment. In this case here, the missiles were being made by Rafael in Israel. I guess 50% of them had an issue, maybe a pre-installation failure of some kind, but they were failing a test, which meant that either they wouldn't function properly in combat or they weren't safe to use at all. But it's been fixed. Took almost a year, but that's not the way to deliver bullets to the front line, is it? Spare parts for Canada's F-35 fleet will be controlled by the US. Duh. Where did you buy your planes? You bought them in the US. Let me give you a little lesson on how spare parts come for your planes when you buy them. Back in the 90s, Canada used to fly the Bell 212 Twin Huey. Wonderful piece of kit. I think it was favorite aircraft I ever worked on. Easy to maintain, wonderful to fly in, and you could fix the vibration issues on it using non-technical equipment. And that was wonderful. Now we wanted to replace this aircraft, so the government decided to go sole source. They didn't bandy out a contract. Now the United States heard about this, and post-Reagan buildup years, they had a boatload of Black Hawk helicopters. They were going to give them to us. Here, take 100 helicopters, as long as you buy our spare parts, right? Because that was going to keep their spare parts industry going. Canada decided, no, we're going to go to our own manufacturer here. Now, Bell, Textron had a manufacturing plant in Mirabel, and Mirabel their plant was having some issues. It was getting ready to close. It wasn't getting any contracts for the Bell 412, which we ended up purchasing, which became the CH 146 Griffin. So we bought them. And as part of the contract, 2 years to deliver the planes, 3 years to make spare parts. That was the contract. So when you see a headline like this, spare parts to be controlled by the U.S., it's fear mongering because, as we know, most of the mainstream media is trapped in a cycle of Trump derangement syndrome. So anything to do with the United States must be bad, must be evil, even though they've been our peaceful partners across the border for over a century. Now, military planners map out restructuring the Canadian Army, says Top Soldier. Well, the military has been restructured many times. I think the worst time ever would have been in the late 60s under the Trudeau government, under unification. I had a great uncle who wouldn't even go to the cenotaph with me on November 11th for what he was put through under unification. That's how upset he was. And years later, I no longer go to the cenotaph because the military made me a second class citizen when they also invoked their fascist medical mandates. To the point where I even left my medals and my flag and my shadow box behind at work, at the wing, on the base, because they no longer represent the core values of what it is to be Canadian, the ethics and values and morals of what Canadians are supposed to be. I'm serious. When you violate these ethics by coercing your members to take an experimental injection, okay, some people say it's not experimental, but Public Health Canada or Health Canada, they refer to what document to say that it was safe and effective. What document did it refer to? Was it a draft document? Was it an actually official document? We don't know because you can't find it on their site. I'm not going to get into that again. We've already covered this on another podcast. Oh, let's get back to the story here. Military planners map out restructuring the Canadian Army. So the Canadian Army is about to embark on a wholesale restructuring in the face of growing demands for troops and equipment both overseas and at home. Well, yes, there's demands for troops because your recruiting's in the toilet, but you don't know why, do you? You had to lower your IQ standards for people to join, and they're still not joining? What's going on? You got something culturally going on in your country? Why are Canadians not joining? Is there someone like me online telling you not to join? A military modernization team is currently studying the problem against a backdrop of shortage of as many as 5,000 soldiers. Yes, we know it's more than 5,000. The army we have now is not the army that we need for the future. Well, duh. And in fact, the army you have now is the more army you needed for the last war. That's the reality of every army you have. Several senior Canadian commanders have recently faced questions about how long the country could hold out if relations with Washington deteriorated further and the United States chose a military option. Are you serious? They asked this question? What the hell? There are more troops on one base in New York State in all of Canada. What is he? Who's going to hold them out? You don't have an effective military to do this. And then why would they pick up arms against people they were fighting alongside just a decade ago in Afghanistan? well, I guess a decade and a half now, isn't it? The Army is facing a number of challenges, both overseas and domestically, and Canada has struggled to field equipment to its force in Latvia, including modern anti tank weapons, air defense systems, and counter drone technology. It currently has 47 capital projects on the go. Yeah. Yeah, we always have capital projects on the go that have been purchased to fight the last war. Or in this case, they might have some capital projects that they've purchased as a result of being involved in Latvia and seeing what's happening between Ukraine and Russia, like anti-drone defense systems, which I believe is part of one of their capital expenditures. The absence of such equipment has been a major gap for soldiers whose job it is to defend Latvia, a NATO member, should Russia turn its military attention to the Baltic nation, to the Baltic region. So we know Russia has been building up along that border as well. But seriously, so this is a NATO operation. That's why they're saying defend Latvia. Some of the equipment deemed critical in light of the way the war between Russia and Ukraine has unfolded is still making its way to the brigade. Other existing equipment, such as Leopard 2A4 tanks, are facing a well-documented shortage of spare parts. Yeah, they got they got a bunch of tanks there. They got a squadron of tanks and no parts. Yeah, no parts to move them. And yeah, I wonder how many of those parts we could have had if we'd not sent them to Ukraine. The Canadian Army currently has three major regular force infantry regiments, a series of tank and artillery units, as well as 185 reserve units located in 86 cities across the country. Now, when you look at the total number of people we have in the Canadian Armed Forces and you divide it by the number of these units, you will find that there's not a lot of people in these units overall. The modernization team is looking at everything and consulting with allies on how they have overhauled their armies to face modern threats. I wonder if they're going to consult with the other militaries if they force them to jibby jab their armed forces members, like they did south of the border, that they have done a 180 on, saying, oh, we should have never done that. No longer a requirement. And all yous who were fired for refusing it, we're going to bring you back if you want to come back. Yeah. That kind of consulting? No, you're not going to do that kind of consulting because that might increase your recruitment. That might increase people wanting to stay in. No, can't do that. Defense Minister Bill Blair also recently announced the military would require what is known as loitering munitions, the kind of drones made infamous online and seen destroying Russian and Ukrainian vehicles. Canada would have had drones a long time ago, but for some reason in Canada, Canadian military is not allowed to operate drones within Canadian airspace. Both deployment to Latvia and responding to domestic emergencies has stretched the army increasingly thin. Oh, yeah, you've committed to a constant deployment of 2,200 Canadian soldiers in Latvia continuously, right? And you want to do a rotation of three groups, right? So you send one group of 2,200, and then they come home and they relax, and then some retire, some move on, and then you refill that group, and then you deploy them again, and so they only have a year. Post deployment, train, pre-deployment, go again, and you want three of these groups of 2,200 people. So 6,600 people, right? But that 6,600 is actually more like 1,200 people because there's no way you can keep up that tempo and not burn those people out because they're going to be gone on deployment, post deployment, settled in for a little bit, retrain, pre-deployment training, pre-deployment leave, deployment. That's the cycle. There's no, you have to pull people out of that after a couple of rotations and then send them back to do regular military stuff for a couple of years, 3, 4 years, because you can't keep that tempo up. People will burn out. But you've committed to that. In fact, you committed to that in your own version of your white paper. A 32.2 million modern anti-tank weapon system known as portable anti-X missile PAXM, which were supposed to arrive last summer, has not arrived, and defense officials say it is still undergoing evaluation, and delivery can't be confirmed until testing is finished. Huh. Yeah, who's in charge of all those purchasing programs and undergoing evaluation, all that stuff? Who's in charge of that? The officers. The officers at the military level are going to be dealing with this, and on the other side is the liberal politicians who made this purchase decision, right? Using the bureaucracy that we have in the military that are very far left leaning, especially when it comes to the voting. We know that for a fact. And they don't have any personal investment in ensuring anything that they do gets to the front lines expeditiously because they have no personal involvement in it. There's nothing telling them, oh, you know what? I'm going to take Friday off. I'm going to go golfing. I'll deal with this paperwork next week. That's the kind of things troops are thinking of out in the field. And they know what's going on back home while people enjoy their weekends, clock out early from work. While these guys are up in their ass working 24/7, doing something dangerous. But people at home that are supporting them don't have the same amount of, let's say, kick in the ass to get things done because they're nice and safe at home. Yeah, while our troops there. No, we need people who are supporting the troops in the field who understand what they need. Not to say, oh, we're still undergoing evaluation. Well, maybe you should have bought something that didn't need evaluation. Maybe you should have bought something that was off the shelf and ready to use right away. But we don't do that. You know why we don't do that? Because somewhere along the lines, there's probably some greasy liberal friend making some money off Canadian taxpayer funding. We are working towards finding our solutions. Who, um, however, the Army is now well aware of the problem, and we are looking at options to streamline that process and bring the parts directly here. Yes, apologies after the fact don't matter to the troops, right? They see that kind of support out there overseas, and you want them to stay in? Yeah, not likely. Now, the big story. Top general says military relationships with the U.S. is solid as Trump threats continue. Yeah, more Trump derangement syndrome propaganda. Now, the country's top military commander delivered a keep calm and carry on message on Wednesday in the face of U.S. President Donald Trump's repeated threats to annex Canada. General Jenny Kerrigan, or as they like to call her right away, Jenny, in that little incident in Iraq when she absconded from her command post because they were under indirect fire and tried to leave Iraq on a U.S. military chopper. Oh, they denied this story, but there's plenty of people out there who said different. And seeing as she was the one who instituted the diversity, equity, inclusion, insanity, and then that ended up with tampons in the men's room. Yeah, she's the one. She's our top general. The relationship that we have with American military colleagues is very stable and very strong. Well, of course it is. They're soldiers down there, just like our soldiers here. They're just going to do what they're told. And they know the relationship we have. And if they are ordered to work with soldiers from another nation, they will do it efficiently, professionally. That's never changed. Militarily, we're not there at all, she said, while pointing to the level to which the two nations rely on each other through the Continental Air Defense Command, NORAD. Of course, we're not there militarily. Too bad you had something to do with that, eh, Jenny? Putting everybody through diversity, equity, inclusion struggle sessions? Yeah, to make sure that everybody's thinking was right, so that they walked into a men's room and saw a tampon dispenser, they wouldn't lose their collective SHIT. Yeah, that's why you have such a nice military there. Another senior defense official noted that there's been a steady increase in the number of Canadians volunteering to join the military, but Commodore Pascal Bellumer, who is running the branch in charge of recruiting, said they're not able to specifically attribute the rise to the political tension and surge in patriotism. So far, we're not tracking anyone who's coming and saying that's the reason. Hmm. Yeah. So I guess your propaganda is not working, Canada. I guess your state-funded media that keeps pushing the Trump derangement syndrome, promote nationalism as a result of going to the recruiting station. People aren't saying that at all. They're not coming in saying, "Oh, we want to join because we want to protect Canada from the bad orange man." No, they're not saying that at all, no matter how much you're pushing it. And I'm glad to see you're admitting it here in this story. He said the military's prospect surveys will provide insight into whether there is a shift into why more people are enlisting. Prospect surveys. Fucking surveys. All the time with the surveys in the military. You know how much time you've eaten up in my career? I'm sure you probably ate up at least a week and a half. In 38 years, you ate up a week and a half of my paid time doing surveys. I got nothing better else to do, I guess. I would just try to build on this renewed sense of Canadian nationalism, in a very old sense that military service is virtuous. It's not something that you just do to make a few bucks here and there. It's something you do because it's the right thing to do. So they could use this because it's the right thing to do. You know what was the right thing to do? The right thing to do was not to coerce your Canadian Armed Forces members into an experimental mRNA gene therapy rebranded as a open quote vaccine, close quote, without informed consent, because there was no informed consent, right? At the time, the little piece of paper that came with the injection bottle that gave you a list of adverse events was blank. So there was no informed consent. And then you turned it around, and even after they started to put the little list of adverse events and people were having those adverse events, you still wouldn't engage Canadian Armed Forces members who were concerned about the risk of these injections. And still, you went and fired 10%. And still, after that, you went and ignored the ones that were injured and those that became unalive, telling them that, well, you had a choice. You didn't need to take it. You could have just left. You didn't need to take it, except you needed to take it to keep your job. And now the ones that did that, that are injured, have been abandoned. So you want to talk about being virtuousness of nationalism? Because a country doesn't do that to its own soldiers. But you've done that. Yes, you have. So there is no virtue in nationalism if your country arbitrarily unalives you and is not held responsible for it. That's the kind of military you're going to be joining if you join, right? Because they will abuse you and you can't hold them to account for it. Canadian Armed Forces says it's on track to meet this year's recruitment goal. Well, I guess when you reduce the IQ necessary to join, that is, that you don't even test for it, right? That you've lowered the standards for people joining. We've covered that in a recent video as well. You know, if you have any kind of medical issues that can be, treated while you're in the military, they'll probably let you join. Absolutely ridiculous. That's their military there, Canada. Yeah. Now, it's bad enough that they're on track to meet. But what have they been doing since the COVIDity stupidity? They know they've lost a lot of people. They know the recruitment's in the toilet. They know that they have to reduce the standards for people to join. They have to reduce. They have to remove an IQ test for people to join. And out of all that, they still can't pull their head out of their butts and look at themselves and say, "Oh, Am I the baddie? Am I the reason why people aren't joining? Well, yeah, you just changed the rules why people could join so you could pat yourself on the back and make it look like you're doing a good job. But if you were doing a good job, why would so many people be releasing? Why? Maybe because you have a bunch of officers who are careerists, who only think about themselves and futuring their career, which means, following all orders, regardless whether they are moral or ethical or not. And what do you end up with? You end up with a bunch of officers who only think of one thing, and that is furthering their career. And one of the ways they do this is by providing ridiculous solutions, problems they have created, right? So, one of the problems Jenny Kerrigan created in the Canadian Armed Forces was that we needed to allow transgendered members to join and to live within the armed forces. Now, they had already been there before she was CDS, right? Decisions had already been made prior to this. The people with these medical, psychological issues are going to be allowed to continue to operate within the armed forces. And then, of course, the Liberals took it to the next degree with her by putting tampons in the men's room for a crisis that they created, which I don't understand. Because apparently, if you're able to swap your gender, can't you just not go to the other bathroom? Am I missing something? Probably. So, why? Why am I saying about officers? So, I just came across this little paper here: Streamlining of Aircraft Maintenance Technicians Training Continuum. This is my ballywick right here. Now, obviously, we've seen people aren't joining, and they're having an issue. Now, in 2021, 2022, my old trade before I became a warrant officer, the AVN trade, the biggest trade in the Air Force of fixing aircraft, was short about 25%. And they were panicking because when you put somebody through the training system, it takes on average about 4 years for somebody to be from the time they join and go through the recruitment training to the time they have become authorized and certified to sign for aircraft work for fixing your planes. It takes about 4 years. Now, there's some that could do it about 3.5 years because I've seen privates attaining that level. But really, that's only about maybe 2% in the aircraft trade. So in this paper here, what they've done is they've gone through and managed to lop off basically a year's worth of training, thinking that this will expedite getting authorized and certified people working on planes that much quicker. I'll take you a little trip down this officer's thinking and show you where it's not going to be working. So here is how it normally works. You can see this little part here is cut off, but it doesn't really matter. So you got 2.5 months of basic military training, your BMQ, then your Common Core. If you head over to SIF site and they have a course ready for you to go right away, and typically they don't, so there might be a little lag, but then you do your little Common Core. Common Core training, how to hold a hammer, how to do lock wiring, basic electrical stuff, just your basic Common Core uh, initial training that you need so that all the other training that you do in regards to aircraft maintenance has a building ground and that you understand what they're talking to you about. Next is the apprentice logbook, 3 to 6 months. Now, I've seen this for a year or more, typically. So you've taken somebody out of training, right? You've sent them off to Saint Jean, or they did their training in Borden. They did their recruit training somewhere. Doesn't matter. It's very basic recruit training. Then you send them off to their trades training and they start now before they can become whatever it is they're going to be. aircraft structures technician, aircraft avionics systems, aviation systems. They all need this Common Core training. So you send them there for that training. Then, while they're there, the school is scrambling. Okay, where are we going to put this guy? And the career manager comes along and says, here's the places. And they work together and they start farming them out. And at this time, basically, Common Core training, they're thinking, okay, well, I think we might put you on the fighter fleet. So we're going to send you to Cold Lake for 3 to 6 months to get your apprentice book filled out. And then they're going to be stuck there at that unit until the next part of their course starts, right? So their ARQ training. That'll be their trades training, whatever trade that they're going into. Could be 6 months, 8 months, 3 months, 4 months. It really depends on the trade, but let's just say it's an average of 6 months. Next, now you're finally fully trained in your trade, but you're a neophyte. All you've done is a bit of a apprentice logbook. You may not even finished it. And now off to unit you go. You're now posted to your squadron. And now you have your journeyman logbook. But now you're on a new type of aircraft. So as part of your journeyman logbook, you're going to be limited what you can do. And you have to finish the logbook. And then you have to go on your type course. And that's the last part that you're not seeing there, the on-type course training. And it goes 3 to 9 months. Now, again, this depends on the aircraft type. The bigger the aircraft, the longer the course. The smaller the aircraft, the less amount of time it takes you to be a technician. So what does this officer want to do? This ARQ part right here is the part that they want to remove. They think that if they just remove that part of the training that teaches a technician, an aviation technician, and this is specific towards the aviation trade, AVN, they can just do that training on type at the end, as you see there, after they do their logbook. They can do it on type. Or they can do it on type with their logbook. So their solution, having broken the system, is to take chunks out of it and then push the training onto the units, because that's what they're doing. If a member finishes, after he's finished his Common Core training here, you're basically sending him to a unit. Now the training cell in the squadron that was only going to be responsible for getting the journeyman to finish their logbook and for coordinating training to go on the type course and any other training. I mean, that's what the training cell is there. There's a lot of other training that they do in a squadron other than aircraft training, but we're talking about aircraft training here. So that training cell, they're there to help these people out. And these people are working on the floor with other technicians who have to take time out of their fixing planes to train these people already. So you are already eating into the efficiency of a squadron by putting in untrained personnel. It's just a natural cycle of how we need to operate in the Royal Canadian Air Force. But now they want to increase that amount of training without increasing the number of people in a squadron. So you are going to increase the inefficiency of maintenance at your Air Force squadrons because you're going to be downloading the training onto the units. That's their solution. Let's make the school time shorter and then just put them out in the field and see what happens. I've never seen more radical communist thinking employed in the Canadian Armed Forces than this. Yeah, we don't need to train people. Oh, they're going to get the training later. They don't understand the fundamentals that are needed. One of the basic complaints that they have in there is that they're being trained on airplanes that aren't even being flown anymore except by the snowbirds. Yes, they're an old aircraft. It doesn't really matter. They are old training aids because these are aircraft mechanics working in a garage, not in an office, not on a computer somewhere trying to do some fault isolation. They're getting their hands dirty with the grease under their fingernails. Hopefully they're wearing protective equipment and that's not happening. No clue whatsoever what it means to be a non-commissioned member working on the floor. And that's one of the biggest failings I think that we have for our officers in the Canadian Armed Forces is that they can just become officers and never actually have to do hands-on work over the trades they're overseeing. I'm not saying they're all like this. I'd say about 25% of the officers I've worked with and for have been decent and really good people. The remainder of them, I'm sorry, careerists, unethical careerists. And those are the people that are in charge of the Canadian Armed Forces now. Unethical careerists who continue to push this ridiculous COVID-19 injection in order for you to be a functioning member of the Canadian Armed Forces. And they wonder why the recruiting is in the tank. Oh, except, for allowing everyone and his dog to join. Yeah, come on in, everybody join. Yeah, we'll just let the poor training system sort you out. Right? We're not going to sort these people out at the recruiting station. We're not going to give them proper IQ tests. We're going to allow people with medical issues to join, and then we're going to throw them into the training system, and we're going to let the poor suckers, the poor master corporals who are on the ground training these civilians to become military members, who are not of the same quality or caliber of the instructor who's teaching them. And the instructor has been told that you can't demean these people. You can't mentally break them. You can't do all the things that that we used to do in the military to make people efficient soldiers that would follow orders. We can't do any of those things anymore. I have no idea what kind of military we are training, but I can tell you what kind of military we have when it comes to how they treat their soldiers. They are purely evil. I've said it right there. You do not abandon your people that you have purposefully harmed, and you do not abandon the families of those members that you purposefully unalived with your medical injection, and then act like it wasn't even work related. Because you're going to get more of this. You're going to get more officers who only think of themselves and their careers and don't care about their men. They're going to restructure the Canadian Army, thinking that they're going to reshuffle the deck chairs on the Titanic, is what they're going to do. That's about enough for today. If you actually hung out to the end for this very boring podcast on military trades and training and all this stuff, I really appreciate it. We'll see you next time. Bye.